He ended up finding over 4,000 others who were experiencing the same thing. In other words, literally eating poison. So let me tell you, rabbit hole, I went down one. I was drinking a bottled water by Nestle, okay, and I was like still really thirsty after drinking the water. I looked at the ingredients and it said it had salt and sugar. So I started Googling, and let me tell you, of course, all these doors started opening and I was like, oh God, it's so much worse than I thought. So then I ended up zeroing in on the Nestle company. And when I tell you Nestle is basically the Disney villain type of bad, it's more than just candy. Nestle is out here just trying to take over the universe, I think. So where does this story start? Let me tell you. It starts with puppies. Puppies. So we're going back to the year 2015. There's this guy named Frank who has a pretty typical life. He also has a few dogs. He's got a German Shepherd, an English Bulldog, and a Labrador. Now one day, Frank starts noticing something a little weird. His German Shepherd is losing fur. And not just a normal amount of fur, he is losing a lot of fur. And to make matters worse, the pup, the little cutie patootie, starts vomiting uncontrollably. Now, Frank is concerned. I mean, who wouldn't be? So he goes to the vet, and then his vet's like, yeah, I don't know what's going on with your dog. But the vet's only theory is that maybe the poor dog has been poisoned. Either way, there isn't much of a treatment to help the dog. So Frank takes his sick little pup home and just really hopes for the best. But a week later, one of Frank's other dogs, his English Bulldog, suddenly dies out of nowhere. Now, the vet performs an autopsy on the Bulldog and finds signs of internal bleeding and liver failure. And you know what's interesting? The symptoms are very similar to what had been going on with the German Shepherd. But unfortunately, it's not over for Frank and his dogs, because just a few days later, the Labrador gets sick. So Frank pulls a Bailey and turns to Google for some kind of answer. So Frank starts Googling, and the only thing he thinks to Google is maybe the brand of his dog's food, Purina Beneful. He found a website that posted product reviews that had a page with 708 one-star ratings for the Purina Beneful food. These reviews were freaking horrific. They had descriptions of dogs going through the exact same thing as Frank's pets were going through. This food that is supposed to be nurturing and taking care of your dog may be doing something really awful to his dogs. So he contacts a lawyer who decided to check it out for himself. He ended up finding over 4,000 others who were experiencing the same thing. Now it turns out Purina Beneful dog food contained fungal mold, lead, arsenic, and something called industrial-grade glycols. In other words, literally eating poison. According to the FDA, the toxin levels did not exceed allowable limits for humans. You see, the limits were never actually set for dogs. What if I told you the problem isn't just with Purina? Oh no. This goes all the way to the top, baby, to the company that owns Purina, the Nestle Corporation. Now, when I tell you Nestle's past is dark, I mean, that's putting it very lightly. So let's start at the beginning. Nestle was started by a German pharmacist named Henry Nestle. He was a salesman/scientist that was constantly chasing the next big thing. One day in 1866, Henry's reading the news when he sees that reports of infant mortality are at an all-time high. Many women at the time couldn't breastfeed, so some kind of substitute to breast milk could potentially save a lot of babies' lives. Then, in 1867, Henry hit the jackpot by creating something called farine lactee. Sounds exciting, right? I know. Well, it's just flour milk. So, okay, what's so special about that, Bailey? Well, this flour milk was one of the very first recipes anybody had ever made for baby formula. Okay, right? Yeah, that's good. This led to the creation of the entire baby food industry, with Henry as the face of success. And this very same year, 1867, Henry shared his recipe with a Swiss chocolate maker. Henry and the chocolate maker decide to go into business together. And this combination of products made Henry so rich that he decided to go out on top and sells his stake in the company in 1875. So it's around this point that Nestle's history starts to get a little bit more mysterious. By 1905, Nestle had merged with so many other companies that they just became known as the Nestle Group. Basically, every time a major event hit Earth, Nestle found a way to profit and grow from it. So now it's 1974. Nestle had their first real controversy. Oh yeah. Their biggest seller at the time was still baby formula, but their profits were they're evening out. They needed to find a way to start selling more formula. So they decided to market the formula as a necessity that was better than breastfeeding. Nestle even deployed saleswomen dressed up in nurses' uniforms to walk the halls of maternity wards, giving away free samples and other gifts to convince mothers that formula was healthier than breast milk. Now, Nestle sees how successful this new marketing campaign has been, and they decide to make it global. They expand their marketing into developing countries and start selling baby formula there too. So later that year, in 1974, a bombshell expose called The Baby Killer came out. It was all about multiple companies selling baby formula and their questionable practices. The report said that in developing countries, the water that's available is contaminated. So the water being used to mix the formula was contaminated. But as the report goes on, there's a whole section specifically about Nestle and the fact that they didn't care that there wasn't clean water in developing countries. When the authors of The Baby Killer pointed all this out to Nestle, they pretty much ignored what the report pointed out and continued to push their formula in developing countries. After the report came out, doctors noticed infant mortality rates and malnutrition increasing in countries where the formula was being sold. So Nestle stopped selling their formula, right? No. You see, there weren't any regulations in place to prevent Nestle's false advertising. So in 1975, people took to the streets to protest Nestle, and instantly their sales started to dip. So, to address the concerns, Nestle joined with all of the other heavy hitters in the infant formula industry to form the International Council of Infant Food Industries. This organization announced a set of rules to try and address the criticisms people had. But these rules were extremely weak and they were honestly very easy to get around. I mean, a company who's getting caught doing grimy shit is now allowed to make their own rules. So, honestly, nothing really changed. Around 1977, a group called the Infant Formula Action Coalition, or INFACT for short, started to fix this. Now, this group called for a complete boycott of Nestle's marketing of infant formula in developing countries. It even got attention of major U.S. politicians like Ted Kennedy and the World Health Organization, or WHO. Then in 1981, the WHO created a special code that would officially prevent Nestle from promoting false advertising. After all the bad press and the loss of revenue, Nestle finally agreed to follow the WHO code. And then Nestle became a wonderful company that changed their focus to creating world peace and giving everyone on Earth free chocolate bars. This is dark history. We know that's not where this story is going. So remember earlier when I said Nestle owned companies all over the world? Well, it turns out during all the baby formula stuff, Nestle was covering up some pretty ugly secrets with some of their other companies. So now I'm going to introduce you to a guy named Luciano Romero. Luciano was a member of a union, and his union oversaw conditions at a milk factory that Nestle co-owned in Colombia with a company named Sicolac. Anyway, the most important thing to know about this factory is that they had close ties with a paramilitary group, which is a kind of private police force with tanks. Great. And this police force does whatever their employer asks. Luciano was trying to get the government to support him and the labor laws that existed in Colombia, but quickly became clear that the government was in cahoots with the paramilitary groups. Colombia's government was known to be very corrupt at this time, and they would look the other way as the unions were constantly attacked by the paramilitary groups. And then on September 10th, 2005, Luciano was kidnapped, tortured, and then murdered by the paramilitary members. After Luciano died, there was an investigation into the assassination. The investigation uncovered that Nestle knew Luciano was in danger, and before he died, Luciano, had informed Nestle that he was receiving death threats, and Nestle refused to help him. So, Nestle was held accountable, right? Of course not. Why would they? And the deeper you dig, the worse things keep looking for Nestle. Because on top of poisoned dog food, messed up baby formula, and the murder of a union leader, Nestle is now coming for your water. Oh, yes, they are. But why would Nestle care about water so much anyways? Well, some of the many companies Nestle owns produce bottled water. So this whole thing is starting to get a little suspicious. Back in 1949, the United Nations declared access to a reasonable standard of living as a human right. And having clean water definitely fell under a reasonable standard of living. But here's the problem. Nestle owns and distributes over 51 brands of bottled water in various countries all over the world, which earns them more than $7.8 million per year. So, corporations like Nestle have little to no incentive to actually protect the sustainability of any water supply. Because if a place can get clean water from their own natural resources, why would they ever need to buy bottled water? So, a way around this is to start buying up natural water supplies, which is what Nestle would do. They would start buying up the bottling rights so that they would essentially own the water. Now, this is technically not illegal. It's highly unethical, but it's not illegal. Nestle could go to a place like Flint, Michigan, and pay for a permit that gives them the rights to the city's water. And with that permit, Nestle could do pretty much whatever they wanted with said water. In 2014, Flint, Michigan switched their tap water source to the Flint River, which was a dumping site for chemicals used in the car manufacturing. As you might imagine, polluted water is not safe to drink, and people started getting extremely sick. On top of that, nobody was able to take showers, cook, do laundry, or do the dishes. And while everyone was yelling at the politicians about the crisis, Nestle saw a business opportunity. Nestle had found a clean water source right next to Flint. And instead of doing something with their billions of dollars to help their residents, they paid a tiny fee of $200 per year to get the bottling rights to this water source. And once they bottled it, they started selling it back to the residents of Flint. Once people started to notice that Nestle was doing this, they called them out, okay? So Nestle did end up giving a lot of the water back to the community, but we are not going to celebrate that because it was the community's water to begin with. In 1998, an African newspaper reported that a bunch of work on the local cocoa plantations was being done by enslaved young boys. And who owned the plantations? Oh, I'll let you guess here. Nestle. The United States government reported that about 15,000 children were working on cocoa and coffee plantations that supplied the Nestle company. And the cocoa industry, including Nestle, they agreed to take steps to reduce child labor by 70% by 2015. That's right, they're like, we'll reduce child labor, not stop it, okay? But there are even more scandals from Nestle. It turns out the building of the cocoa plantations directly contributes to the illegal cutting down of trees all over Africa, which is linked to a drop in population for a number of animals such as chimps and elephants. But if you want some kind of silver lining to the story, we have one, just one for you. Her name is Dr. Yasmin. In 2000, she worked as a high-ranking food executive at Nestle when she discovered that Nestle's food safety controls were lacking a bit. She also saw other major issues in the supply chain that made the food at high risk for contamination. So she raised these issues with her boss in 2003, but she got ignored. She was determined, though, and she kept alerting her bosses at every chance she got, until she was fired from her job in 2010. So after she got fired, she took Nestle to court for firing her illegally, and she actually won. She has since become an advocate for stronger whistleblower protections globally. In conclusion, Nestle has a history of abuse, false advertising, child labor happening, exploitation, being tied to murders, poisoning people, trying to own all of the water, and then acting like that's normal, playing God, But when you look at what Nestle owns, Nestle owns everything. We are so screwed. What do we do? Panic. Just breathe. How can I end this in like a positive? Because I'm really sorry to like dump all this on you. I guess the positive takeaway here is that it started out good. I was just trying to help, feed some babies. That was nice. Cool. Yeah. Anyways, I hope you have a good day today. You make good choices. And don't forget, Nestle socks. Okay? And I hope to be talking to you next week. We'll see. Bye. Thank you.